The small diner sat on the corner of a quiet street where the same faces came in every morning and every evening. It wasn't fancy. The paint on the walls had faded, and the floor creaked with every step, but people liked it that way. It felt familiar. It felt like home. Behind the counter, there worked a young waitress who most people didn't notice much. She was there every single day, opening early, staying late, and always with that tired but polite smile. Her name was Emily. She wasn't the loud type. She didn't talk much unless someone spoke to her first. Some customers liked her calm nature. Others thought she was just shy or maybe not too bright. No one really knew her story, but they made their own guesses anyway. She worked hard, carrying plates of pancakes, wiping down tables, taking orders, and rushing between the counter and kitchen. She always moved quickly but never made a fuss. The regular customers, the ones who came every day, had grown used to her being there. She was just that quiet waitress who always wore her hair tied up and never complained. But what no one knew was that behind that quiet face and tired eyes lived a girl who carried a whole world inside her. A world full of words, songs, and dreams she never spoke about. Every night after closing, when the last table was cleared and the lights dimmed, she'd stay for a few extra minutes. She'd take out an old notebook from her apron pocket. It was small, its pages soft and crumpled from years of use. Inside, it was filled with lyrics, songs she'd written in the few quiet hours she had to herself. Words about life, love, struggle, and hope. She didn't tell anyone about it. Not her co-workers, not even her friends. It was her secret escape from the noise of the world. She lived with her mother in a small apartment just a few streets away from the diner. Her mother had been sick for a while, and Emily worked long hours to cover the bills. Every morning before work, she'd make sure her mother had breakfast and her medicine. Then she'd walk to the diner through the same cracked sidewalk she'd known all her life. She never complained. She never asked for help. People said she was too quiet, but truthfully, she just didn't have time to talk. Life had made her older than her years. At work, her co-workers didn't take her seriously. One of them, a woman, who'd been at the diner for a long time, often joked that Emily would probably be stuck here forever. The others laughed, not out of cruelty, but because they didn't think their words mattered. To them, she was just another girl serving food, a face they'd forget if she left one day. But Emily heard every word. She always did. She smiled, like it didn't matter. But later, when she'd walk home under the streetlights, those words stayed with her. Still, every time she felt small, she'd open that little notebook and write something new. Music was the only place where she felt seen. Sometimes, when she was alone cleaning after hours, she'd hum softly to herself. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had something special, a warmth that could quiet even the noisiest room. But she always stopped singing the moment someone came in. She didn't want anyone to hear. She didn't think her voice was anything worth showing. There was one man in the kitchen who noticed her, though, an older cook named Joe. He'd worked there for years, a kind soul with tired eyes and gentle humor. He was the kind who noticed the small things about people, things others overlooked. He saw how Emily never took breaks, how she always offered to cover extra shifts, and how she sometimes scribbled in her little notebook during the short, quiet moments between orders. One evening, when the diner had finally emptied out, Joe came out from the kitchen and saw her sitting at the counter, writing again. He leaned against the doorframe, wiping his hands on his apron. "You write a lot in that thing," he said with a smile. Emily looked up, startled, and quickly closed the notebook. "Oh, it's nothing, just thoughts." Joe smiled. "Thoughts, huh? The kind that rhyme?" She laughed softly. "Something like that." He didn't push her. He just nodded and went back to cleaning. But after that night, he began to notice how she always hummed the same few tunes. He realized she was writing songs, and that she was too shy to share them. Days went by. The same routine repeated. Morning rush, lunch crowd, evening cleanup. Emily kept to herself, but sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she'd look out the window at the sunset and imagine what life might be like if people actually listened to her songs. Then she'd shake off the thought and get back to work. The diner wasn't just her job, it was her whole life. Every sound, every smell, Every person who walked through that door became part of her story. The laughter, the small talk, the sound of coffee being poured, all of it found a place in her heart, like quiet background music to her life. But despite her kindness and hard work, people underestimated her. When new staff joined, they rarely asked for her help. When customers left tips, she often got the smallest share. She didn't argue. She simply smiled and carried on. There was one night, though, when she almost broke down. It was late and the diner had closed. She was sitting alone in one of the booths, counting her tips. It wasn't much. Just a few small bills and some coins. Her hands trembled a little as she looked at the numbers on her phone. Rent due soon, medicine to buy, groceries running low. It was too much for one person, but she never told anyone. Instead, she just closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then, like she always did, she reached into her apron and pulled out that little notebook. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. "I'll keep going," she whispered to herself as the pen moved. "Even if no one sees me now." The next morning she came to work like nothing had happened. But Joe could tell something was different. He didn't say anything. He just gave her an extra cup of coffee and a quiet smile. Weeks later, a small sign appeared in the diner window. "Open mic night, this Saturday. All welcome." The owner thought it would bring in more customers. The staff thought it'd be fun. People from the town started talking about it. Some planned to sing, others to tell stories or play guitar. Everyone seemed excited, except Emily. She looked at the sign every day but never said a word. Joe noticed, of course. "You should do it," he told her one afternoon, while chopping onions in the kitchen. "You've got something special, kid." Emily laughed nervously. "Me? No way. I can't stand in front of people. I can barely take an order without forgetting the table number." Joe smiled. "You're tougher than you think. People don't see it yet, but they will." She didn't answer. She just smiled, but her heart was racing. The thought of singing in front of people terrified her. What if they laughed? What if she forgot the words? What if her voice cracked? She shook her head and decided not to think about it again. But that night when she got home, she couldn't stop hearing Joe's words. "You've got something special." She sat at her small kitchen table, her mother asleep in the next room, and opened her notebook again. She turned to one of her favorite songs, one she'd never shared with anyone. It was about being invisible, about working hard while people looked right through you, about dreaming quietly, hoping someone might notice one day. She sang it softly under her breath, the words blending with the faint hum of the refrigerator. For a moment, she forgot her worries. For a moment, she felt free. Back at the diner, life went on. Customers came and went, jokes were shared, dishes clattered, and the world kept spinning. But something inside Emily had started to change. She didn't realize it yet, but that little voice inside her, the one that told her to keep writing, to keep dreaming, was growing stronger. And even though the world still saw her as just a quiet waitress, there was something powerful hidden behind those tired eyes. Something waiting for the right moment to shine. That moment was coming soon. And when it did, it would change everything. The days passed quietly after the diner put up that open mic night sign. People in town kept talking about it. Who would sing, who might play guitar, who would show up just to watch. It became the little town's main topic. Every customer who came in had something to say about it. "Are you going to sing?" Someone asked one of the regulars. "You kidding? I can't carry a tune," the man laughed. "Well, maybe that quiet waitress will surprise us," another joked, nodding toward Emily. She smiled politely, pretending not to hear. But deep inside, those words hit something. The idea of her singing in front of people sounded impossible. She couldn't even imagine it without her hands shaking. Still, every evening when the diner closed, she found herself humming again. It had become a quiet habit, cleaning the tables with soft music under her breath. Her songs weren't perfect, but there was truth in them. They came from a place of longing, of trying to hold on when life kept testing her. One night, the diner was almost empty when she thought she was alone. The soft music playing on the old radio blended with her humming. Her voice rose just a little, enough to echo faintly through the room. She didn't notice that Joe, the cook, was standing in the kitchen doorway listening. When she finished, he clapped softly. Startled, she spun around, her face turning red. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know anyone was here," Joe grinned. "You've got a voice that could stop time, kid. You should let people hear it." She looked down, embarrassed. No, it's nothing, I just, sometimes. "I'm not a singer," he shook his head. "You don't have to call yourself one. You already are one. You just haven't realized it yet." She didn't know what to say. Compliments were rare in her world, and ones like that felt almost too heavy to hold. She smiled shyly, mumbled a thank you, and went back to wiping tables. But after that night, she started to believe, just a little bit, that maybe Joe was right. The rest of the staff didn't know anything about her singing. They just saw the same quiet girl who took every extra shift and never complained. To them, she was dependable, hardworking, but ordinary. No one imagined there was anything more to her story. At home, life wasn't easy. Her mother's health wasn't improving much, and the bills kept coming. Still, she never let her mother see her worry. She always smiled, cooked dinner, and asked about her day. After her mother went to sleep, she'd sit by the window with her notebook and her guitar, an old one she'd bought secondhand years ago. Its strings were worn, but to her it was the most precious thing she owned. That week, she started writing a new song. It was about being underestimated, about people seeing only what's on the surface and never the heart behind it. She poured every bit of her life into those lyrics, the long shifts, the small tips, the whispered judgments. But she also wrote about hope, the kind that doesn't fade even when no one believes in you. The more she wrote, the more she felt something inside her waking up. For years, she had worked just to survive, but for the first time, she wanted to live for something more. One afternoon, when the diner was quiet, Joe came out and sat across from her. "Open mic nights in 2 days," he said, sipping his coffee. "You thinking about it?" She laughed nervously. "Thinking about it, yes. Doing it? Not a chance." He raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "I don't know. I've never sung in front of anyone. What if I mess up? What if they laugh?" Joe leaned back, crossing his arms. "And what if they don't? What if you sing and the whole place goes silent because they realize they've been wrong about you?" His words hit her harder than he probably knew. She wanted to believe him, but the fear was stronger. She'd spent so many years trying not to be noticed that the idea of standing in front of a crowd felt impossible. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing Joe's words in her head. Around midnight, she got out of bed quietly so she wouldn't wake her mother. She took her guitar and sat near the window. The moonlight fell on her notebook as she flipped to her new song. Her hands shook a little as she strummed the chords softly. Her voice filled the small room, gentle and trembling at first, then growing steadier. It wasn't perfect. Some notes cracked, her breath wavered, but it was real. The kind of voice that came straight from the heart. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long time. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from something like courage. The next day at work, she felt different. Still quiet, still humble. But something inside her had shifted. She kept glancing at the open mic poster on the wall. Every time she did, her heart raced. By the end of her shift, she made a decision she couldn't quite explain. Before she could change her mind, she walked up to the counter where the sign-up sheet was pinned. Her hands were trembling as she picked up the pen. She didn't even look at the names already written. She just wrote her own name at the bottom and walked away quickly, pretending it meant nothing. Joe saw her from the kitchen window and smiled to himself but didn't say a word. The following day, the talk in the diner grew louder. Everyone was excited. People were guessing who would perform, who might win the small prize, and who would make a fool of themselves. Emily tried to act normal, but inside she was terrified. She hadn't told anyone she signed up. That evening, as they were closing, Joe came out with a grin. "So I saw your name on that list." She froze. "Oh, yeah. About that. I might back out." "No, you won't," he said kindly. "You've got something worth sharing. Don't let fear take that away." She sighed, sitting down on one of the stools. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," he said softly. "But the best things in life never are." She looked at him, unsure whether to thank him or to cry. She just nodded. That night, when she got home, she practiced again. Her fingers hurt from the guitar strings, but she didn't stop. She wanted it to be perfect, Not for fame, not for money, but because it was the first thing in her life she was doing for herself. The night before the event, she almost backed out. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to imagine herself on that stage. She saw the same girl she'd seen for years, tired eyes, messy hair, worn-out uniform. She didn't see anything special. But then she remembered Joe's words. What if they realize they've been wrong about you? The next morning, she woke up before sunrise. She looked at her notebook one more time before leaving for work. Her hands brushed over the lyrics she'd written, words she never thought anyone would hear. She tucked the notebook into her bag, her heart pounding. When she got to the diner, people were already setting up decorations. The little stage was built in the corner near the window. It wasn't big, just a microphone, a stool, and a single spotlight. But to her, it looked like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. All day she worked as usual, serving customers, clearing tables, smiling politely. But inside, her stomach was in knots. Every time someone mentioned the event that night, her hands grew clammy. By the time the diner closed for the day, she almost told Joe she couldn't do it. But when she saw him smiling proudly from the kitchen door, something inside her told her to stay. As she stood there in her apron, looking at that tiny stage, she whispered to herself, maybe it's time. She didn't know what would happen that night. She didn't know if anyone would even listen. But for the first time, she decided she would stop hiding. And as the sun went down and the lights dimmed, she took a deep breath, not knowing that her life was about to change forever. The night finally came. The little diner that usually stayed quiet after sunset looked completely different. Strings of warm lights hung from the ceiling, soft music played in the background, and the smell of fresh coffee and pie filled the air. People from all over the town showed up, families, students, old regulars, and even a few strangers who'd heard about the event. It was the diner's first ever open mic night, and everyone was buzzing with excitement. Some people were laughing, some were tuning their guitars, and some were just there to enjoy the evening. The small stage in the corner had a single stool, a microphone, and a little stand for lyrics. It looked simple, but to Emily it felt like the biggest stage in the world. She stood behind the counter, her hands shaking as she poured coffee for customers. Her name was on the list near the bottom, which meant she'd have to watch everyone else go before her. Each performer made her more nervous. One man played guitar and cracked jokes between songs. A young girl sang a pop song that made the crowd cheer. A group of teenagers performed something funny and offbeat. The audience clapped, laughed, and shouted encouragement. But every time someone finished their act, Emily's heart beat faster. Her palms were sweating and her stomach felt tight. She'd practiced her song over and over, but now her mind was blank. She kept looking at the small notebook she carried in her apron, the one that held her song. Joe noticed how tense she was. During a quick break, he walked over and handed her a glass of water. "Breathe," he said quietly. "You've got this." "I don't know if I can do it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Yes, you can," he replied calmly. "You've already done the hard part. You showed up." She managed a small smile, but her hands didn't stop trembling. She looked at the crowd, people chatting, laughing, waiting for the next performer, and wondered what they'd think of her. Would they laugh? Would they ignore her? The thought scared her, but a small voice inside whispered that she'd regret it forever if she didn't try. When the host finally called her name, there was a small pause. Some people in the crowd looked around, not recognizing the name. A few turned their heads toward the counter. "Wait," someone said. "That's the waitress." A few chuckled softly, not in a mean way, just surprised. They didn't expect her to be on the list. Emily's heart pounded as she stepped out from behind the counter, still wearing her apron. She walked slowly toward the small stage. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the microphone, the room quieted down. She looked out at the crowd, the faces of people she served every day. Some smiled kindly, some looked curious, and a few looked doubtful. She swallowed hard and took out her folded piece of paper. Hi," she began softly. Her voice was shaky. I've never done this before." A few people chuckled gently, trying to encourage her. Someone in the back shouted, "You got this!" and the crowd clapped lightly. She took a deep breath. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the guitar strap on her shoulder. She looked down at her lyrics one last time, then began to play the first few chords. At first, her voice was small, barely above a whisper. The diner was so quiet, that even the sound of the coffee machine clicking in the background seemed loud. But as she kept singing, something started to change. Her voice grew steadier. Her words flowed more naturally. The song was simple but powerful. It told a story about working hard in silence, about dreams hidden behind tired smiles, about people who get overlooked but never give up. Every line came straight from her heart, and you could feel it in the air. The crowd stopped moving. The laughter died down. The clinking of forks and cups faded until all that remained was her voice, soft, clear, and full of emotion. It wasn't the kind of voice that needed fancy notes or loud power. It was honest, real. By the second verse, even the people who hadn't paid attention at first were completely silent. The manager, who was usually busy checking receipts, stood still at the counter. A couple who had come in just for dessert put down their forks and stared at her like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Her voice shook again near the end, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from emotion. The lyrics hit close to home. They spoke about being invisible, about carrying pain quietly and still choosing to hope. When she sang the final line, her voice faded softly into the still air. Then for a long moment there was nothing, no sound at all. The whole diner was frozen, caught in that moment. Then one person started to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause. People were standing up, cheering, clapping loudly. Some even had tears in their eyes. Emily looked around, stunned. She couldn't believe what was happening. The same people who had barely noticed her every day were now looking at her like she was someone else, someone worth listening to. Her hands covered her mouth as she tried not to cry. She gave a small bow, her cheeks red, her heart full. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Joe stood in the back, smiling proudly. He didn't clap right away, he just watched, his eyes glistening. When she finally looked his way, he gave her a little nod as if to say, "I told you so." After the applause finally settled, people came up to her one by one. Some said, "That was beautiful." Others asked if she had written the song herself. A few just smiled and said, "You have a gift." The manager came over, patting her shoulder. "You've been holding out on us," he said with a grin. "That was something special." She laughed nervously, still trying to catch her breath. "Thank you," she whispered. As the night went on, people kept talking about her performance. Even after other acts followed, her song stayed in everyone's mind. It was the kind of performance that touched people quietly but deeply. By the end of the night, when the diner finally emptied out, she sat at one of the booths, exhausted but glowing. Joe came over with 2 cups of coffee and placed one in front of her. "You did it," he said. She smiled, still half in disbelief. "I almost ran away, you know." "I know," he said. "But you didn't. That's what matters." She looked around the now silent diner, the same place where she had worked for years. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, but tonight it felt different. It felt alive, like the walls themselves had heard her story and were still echoing it back. When she walked home that night, the air was cool and calm. She clutched her guitar case in one hand and her little notebook in the other. The streetlights flickered softly and the world felt lighter somehow. She didn't know what the next day would bring. She didn't know if anything would change. But as she walked, she couldn't stop smiling. For once, she didn't feel invisible. For once, she felt like she mattered. She reached home quietly, opened the door, and peeked into her mother's room. Her mother was asleep, breathing softly. Emily sat by her bedside for a moment and whispered, "I did it, Mom. I really did it." She went to her room, took out her notebook, and flipped to a new page. The words came easily this time, or lighter, freer. She wrote about courage, about small moments that change everything, about the power of taking one single chance. Outside, the town slept peacefully, unaware that something special had happened that night inside a little diner. A waitress who everyone thought was ordinary had shown the world that sometimes the quietest voices hold the most powerful stories. And as she closed her notebook and set it by her bedside, she knew this was only the beginning. Something had shifted inside her forever. The morning after the open mic night, the diner felt different. The same sun streamed through the same windows. The same bell over the door chimed whenever someone entered. But there was something new in the air. A quiet buzz, a warmth that hadn't been there before. When Emily came in for her shift, the first person she saw was Joe, already behind the counter. He looked up from the coffee machine, smiled, and said, "Our star is here." She blushed immediately. "Oh, please don't start," she said shyly, tying her apron around her waist. But she could already tell things had changed. The regular customers who had known her for years greeted her differently that morning. Usually they'd just mumble their usual order or glance at the menu. But today they smiled wider, made eye contact, asked how she was. "You sang beautifully last night," one of them said. "Didn't know you had it in you." Another customer chimed in. "I've been coming here for 5 years, and that's the first time I've seen the place go quiet like that. You made us all feel something." Emily smiled politely, her heart full but still a little unsure what to say. She wasn't used to attention, especially not the good kind. By noon, the diner was busier than usual. People who hadn't come the night before stopped in just to ask about the waitress who sang. Some had already seen the short video someone posted online. It wasn't fancy, just a phone recording. But the emotion in her voice was enough to move anyone who watched it. The post had been shared dozens of times and comments kept pouring in. One customer pulled out his phone and showed her. "Look," he said, "you're all over the internet." She froze. "What? No, that can't be me." He turned the phone around. There she was, standing on that tiny stage holding her guitar, eyes closed as she sang. The caption read, "The waitress who made a whole diner silent." Her cheeks turned red, but deep down she couldn't help but smile. She never thought anyone outside that diner would hear her voice. By evening, the owner came by with a grin. "You've done something good for us, you know," he said. "We've had more people today than we've had all month. Everyone wants to know who you are." She laughed nervously. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. Are you kidding?" He said, "You made this place shine. You should sing here more often." For the rest of the day, people kept stopping by just to talk to her. Some brought flowers, others left notes on napkins saying how much they loved her song. One little girl came up shyly and said, "I want to sing like you one day." That simple moment nearly brought tears to her eyes. Later that night, when the diner finally closed, she sat at one of the booths with Joe. The lights were dim, and only the sound of the fridge filled the quiet room. "I still can't believe all this," she said softly. "It feels like a dream." Joe smiled. "It's not a dream. It's what happens when you stop hiding what you're meant to do." She looked down at her hands. "I just never thought anyone would care. I've been here so long just working and keeping to myself. And now all of a sudden," he interrupted gently, "now all of a sudden they see you. But you didn't change overnight. You've always been this person. They're just catching up." Those words stayed with her. Over the next few days, more people began to reach out. A local musician stopped by the diner one evening. He introduced himself and said he'd seen the video online. "I run a small studio downtown," he said. "You ever thought about recording your song properly?" She was stunned. "Oh, I don't think I'm ready for that," he smiled kindly. "You're more ready than you think. You've got a gift. The kind people don't forget." He left his business card on the counter and told her to think about it. She tucked it into her notebook, not sure if she'd ever have the courage to call. But that night, when she walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Recording a song, her? It sounded impossible, yet for the first time not completely out of reach. At home, her mother was sitting up in bed when she walked in. "I saw you on the phone," her mother said with a faint smile. "Someone showed me your video at the clinic." Emily laughed, embarrassed. "Oh no, it's spreading too fast." Her mother reached out, held her hand and said, "You looked so happy, sweetheart. I haven't seen that light in your eyes for a long time." Her throat tightened. She hugged her mother gently, whispering, "I was scared the whole time." Her mother smiled. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing it anyway. Those simple words filled her with warmth. That night, she took out her notebook again. For the first time, she didn't write about pain or loneliness. She wrote about courage, about how one small moment can change how the world sees you and how you see yourself. By the end of the week, the diner's open mic video had spread far beyond their little town. It wasn't viral in a huge way, but it reached enough people to make a difference. Comments poured in from strangers. Some said her song gave them hope. Others said it reminded them of their own dreams. It amazed her that something so personal, something she had once hidden from everyone, could touch people she had never met. One morning, a letter came to the diner addressed to her. Inside was a short note. "I heard your song online. It gave me strength when I needed it most. Thank you for reminding me that quiet people can be strong too." She kept that letter folded inside her notebook. It became her reminder that she mattered, not because of fame, but because she made someone feel less alone. Soon, she finally decided to visit the studio the musician had told her about. It was small, cozy, and smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. When she walked in, she was nervous, clutching her notebook like a shield. The musician smiled and said, "No pressure. Just sing the way you did that night." She closed her eyes and began to sing. The same song, the same soft voice, but this time recorded for the world to hear. When she finished, the room was silent again, just like that night at the diner. "You've got something special," he said quietly. "People will feel this." She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing. She didn't want to stop. Back at the diner, things went on as usual, but everyone treated her differently now. Customers asked for her by name. Some came just to talk to her, to hear her laugh, or to tell her what her song meant to them. The walls that once felt like a cage now felt like home, the place where everything began. Still, she stayed humble. She kept serving coffee, cleaning tables, smiling at customers like she always had. But inside, she carried something new, a quiet confidence. One night, as she and Joe were locking up, he looked at her and said, "You ever think about what's next?" She thought for a moment and smiled. "For now, I just want to keep singing. I don't know where it'll take me, but I think I'm finally ready to find out." Joe nodded. "Good, because the world needs more voices like yours." As she walked home that night, she felt the cool air on her face and the weight of her guitar on her back. The streets were empty, but she didn't feel alone anymore. For years, she had been the quiet waitress nobody believed in. But now people looked at her and saw more than that. They saw someone who dared to share her truth. Someone who reminded them that even the softest voices can echo far and wide. And deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of her story. The world was finally listening, and she had so much more to say.